A veteran and his dog save an elderly woman, then inherit her mysterious orchard. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a quiet afternoon in the small town of Birchwood, nestled just outside of the bustling city, where life moved slower and the weather was always unpredictable. The storm was coming in fast, dark clouds rolling in from the horizon like a thick blanket of dread. The wind picked up, and soon, the rain started to fall in sheets, drenching everything in sight. But in the midst of the storm, there was a sound that broke through the chaos, a faint cry for help. Nolan Creed, a 40-year-old veteran, had been walking along the empty street, his loyal German shepherd, Max, by his side. His boots squelched with each step, the weight of the rain making them heavier. Nolan had been through much in his life. Too many battles, too many memories of the war he could never fully escape. But through it all, he still had Max, his faithful companion who had seen him through the darkest days. They had been moving from town to town, looking for work, looking for peace. But today, the storm had changed everything. As they walked past the old bakery at the corner of Maple Street, Nolan heard the faintest of sounds, a voice, weak but unmistakable, calling for help. Max's ears perked up immediately, his tail stiffened, and without a second thought, Nolan's heart skipped a beat. He turned towards the bakery, and there she was, an elderly woman, struggling against the violent winds, trying to hold onto the railing of her porch. The large pine tree in her front yard had been struck by lightning and was beginning to fall, its branches creaking ominously. In a split second, Nolan's instincts took over. He ran towards the woman, yelling at her to hold on. Max barked, running alongside him, sensing the danger. Nolan reached her just as the tree came crashing down, its heavy branches landing across the porch. Without thinking, he dove forward, pushing the woman out of harm's way, just as the beam from the tree slammed into the ground with a deafening crack. The woman was shaken, but she was alive. Nolan helped her to her feet, his heart racing from the adrenaline. Max was already by his side, sniffing around the debris, making sure there was no immediate danger. "You're safe now," Nolan said, his voice rough but comforting. The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. I thought it was the end." Nolan simply shook his head. "No need for thanks. I'm just glad I was here." The woman introduced herself as Maeve Halloway, the owner of Sugar Pine Bakery, the last standing business on this street. She invited Nolan and Max inside to warm up, and despite his reluctance, he agreed. The storm raged on outside, the wind howling through the cracks in the old building. As they stepped inside, the smell of freshly baked bread and cinnamon filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold rain and the chaos outside. Maeve seemed like a woman who had lived a full life, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, her face lined with the years of experience and hard work. She was small but sturdy, and there was a warmth in her eyes that suggested a life well lived. Sit," she said, gesturing to the small kitchen table. "I'll make you both something warm. You must be freezing." Nolan nodded gratefully, sitting down at the table while Max curled up by the door, his watchful eyes scanning the room. As Maeve bustled around the kitchen, Nolan's gaze drifted to the bakery's old wooden floors, worn down by years of use. The walls were lined with old photos, black and white images of families and festivals, a glimpse into the past. One photo caught Nolan's eye, a picture of Maeve and a man in uniform, standing proudly with a pie in hand. A memory, no doubt. As Maeve handed him a steaming cup of tea, she looked at him with a curious expression. "You're a soldier, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft. Nolan gave a small nod, feeling the weight of her gaze. "Yeah, I was in the army. Left a long time ago, though." Maeve studied him for a moment, as if weighing something in her mind. "You're a good man," she said finally, her tone gentle but firm. "I can tell, and that's why I'm going to tell you something important." Nolan looked at her, unsure of what she meant. But before he could ask, Maeve continued. "This bakery, this whole town, is more than just bricks and mortar. It's something special. My husband built it many years ago, and we've had our fair share of struggles. But I believe in the kindness of strangers, and I believe you were meant to be here tonight." Nolan was confused, but listened intently. He had no idea what she was getting at, but something in her eyes told him it was important. Little did he know, this storm would not only change his night, but would lead him to something far more extraordinary than he could have ever imagined. As the storm continued to rage outside, Nolan sat at the small kitchen table of Sugar Pine Bakery, feeling the warmth of the room seep into his bones. Maeve had returned to the oven, her hands moving with practiced ease, even as her body showed signs of age. The flickering light from the old hanging bulb illuminated her face, casting shadows that seemed to tell stories of the many years she had spent running this bakery, holding together a piece of birchwood that had always felt just a little too close to falling apart. Nolan glanced down at the mug of tea in his hands, the warmth calming the chill that had gripped him since the storm hit. Max, still alert, sat by the door, his eyes trained on the street outside as though waiting for something or someone to appear. Nolan's mind wandered as he sipped the tea, the peacefulness of the bakery contrasting sharply with the chaos that had led him here. He thought back to his time in the army, the wars, the battles, the moments of peace that always felt too short. But sitting here now, in this warm, quiet bakery, there was a sense of something different, something important that he couldn't quite place. Maeve seemed to sense it too. She returned to the table with a plate of freshly baked bread, the scent of cinnamon still thick in the air. She set the plate down in front of Nolan with a soft smile. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "I've been moving around a lot," Nolan replied, his voice quieter than he intended. "I guess you could say I'm still looking for something." Maeve nodded, as if understanding more than Nolan had said. "Aren't we all, dear? But sometimes, what we're looking for isn't something you can find on the road. It's something that finds you." Nolan gave her a puzzled look, but Maeve only smiled and returned to her work. He had a feeling that whatever she was talking about, he wasn't ready to understand just yet. As the hours passed, the storm outside began to slow, the wind dying down to a whisper. The quiet gave Nolan time to think, to reflect on what had happened earlier, how the storm had brought him here, to this moment. The idea that a simple act of kindness had led him into the heart of a stranger's life seemed almost too simple to be real. Maeve had saved him, just as he had saved her. And yet, there was something in her story that felt like it was still unfolding, something he couldn't yet see. After a while, Maeve stood up from the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, I think the storm is passing. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Nolan," she said, her voice kind. "But I should warn you. This bakery, this town, they have a way of changing people." Nolan didn't know what to say. He had been drifting from place to place for so long that he hadn't stopped to think about the fact that he was actually being offered a home, even if only for a short time. "Thank you," he said quietly. Maeve nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. "Now let me show you something." She led him to the back of the bakery, where an old wooden door stood, half hidden behind a stack of crates. "This is the old cellar," she explained, her hands brushing the dust off the door. "It's been locked up for years, but I think you're the one who should see what's inside." Nolan followed her as she opened the door with a creak, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that led down into the earth. The air in the cellar was cool, the scent of aged wood and earth filling his nose. He hesitated, feeling a strange pull to step inside, as if the place itself was calling to him. As they descended the stairs, the dim light from Maeve's lantern cast long shadows on the walls. At the bottom, they entered a small, stone-walled room. There, in the center, was a large wooden chest, its surface carved with intricate designs, worn smooth with age. "I've kept this hidden for so long," Maeve said softly, her voice almost reverent. "But I think it's time someone else knew about it." She knelt down and unlocked the chest, revealing its contents. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, were dozens of old, faded letters and an ancient, dust-covered journal. "These belong to my husband," Maeve said, her voice thick with emotion. "He was a soldier too, back in the day, before he built this bakery. He always told me there was something special about this town, something hidden beneath it. These letters, this journal, they were his way of trying to figure it all out." Nolan carefully picked up the journal, its pages yellowed with age. As he opened it, he saw that the handwriting was strong and precise, filled with detailed notes about the land around Birchwood, references to strange occurrences, and even mentions of a mysterious orchard hidden deep in the woods. He looked up at Maeve, who was watching him closely. "There's something in those woods, Nolan," she said, her eyes searching his. "Something that could change everything." The words hit Nolan like a wave. Something hidden in the woods. The orchard. The journal. All of it seemed like a puzzle he had to solve. The pieces were coming together, and yet, he couldn't quite see the whole picture. But one thing was clear: whatever was hidden in those woods, it was waiting for him to find it. The next morning, Nolan woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the dusty windows of Sugar Pine Bakery. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, clear sky and a stillness that felt almost unnatural after the previous night's chaos. He could hear the faint chirping of birds outside, a welcome contrast to the howling winds that had filled the air the night before. Max, who had been sleeping beside him, stirred and stretched, his ears perked up at the sound of the birds. Nolan smiled softly at his dog, who had always been his most loyal companion, never leaving his side, no matter where the road took them. As he sat up and rubbed his eyes, the events of the previous night came rushing back. The bakery, the storm, and most of all, the chest in the cellar. The strange feeling that had settled in his chest after reading the journal persisted, and Nolan couldn't shake the thought that there was something important in those woods, something that could change everything. Maeve had spoken about the orchard and the secrets buried in the land, and though he didn't yet understand the full extent of it, Nolan felt a pull. It was as if the land itself was calling him. He couldn't ignore it. After a quick breakfast of the bread Maeve had baked the night before, Nolan stood up and made his way to the bakery door, the weight of the journal still heavy in his jacket pocket. Max followed him, as always, his tail wagging in quiet anticipation. Maeve was already up and about, tending to the shop. She looked up as Nolan stepped into the kitchen, ready for another day. "You're not going to find what you're looking for by staying inside, you know," she said, her voice light, but with an undertone of seriousness. Nolan paused at the doorway, considering her words. He had been trying to ignore the growing sense of curiosity that tugged at him, but the truth was, he didn't know how to ignore it anymore. "I think you're right," Nolan said, his voice calm but determined. "I need to see what's out there. What's in those woods?" Maeve's eyes softened, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She nodded, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You'll find more than you expect," she said quietly, as if she had known all along what lay ahead. With that, Nolan grabbed his jacket, and he and Max left the warmth of the bakery behind, stepping into the cool morning air. The sky above was clear, the kind of blue that seemed to stretch on forever, and the earth smelled fresh, as if it had just been washed clean. They made their way through the streets of Birchwood, the town still sleepy, with only a few people out and about, getting ready for the day. Nolan felt the familiar hum of quiet in his chest, but today it was different. Today, the world felt full of possibility. The woods were only a few miles outside of town, a place Nolan had passed many times before without giving it much thought. But now, every step he took toward the forest felt like a step closer to something important, something life-changing. As they neared the edge of the woods, Nolan paused, looking up at the trees that loomed overhead. The thick canopy blocked out most of the sunlight, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Max, as if sensing Nolan's unease, sniffed the ground and gave a low growl, his body tense. Nolan knelt down beside his dog, placing a hand on Max's fur. "It's okay, boy," he said softly, though he wasn't entirely sure it was. There was something eerie about this place, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. But Nolan knew he couldn't turn back now. With a deep breath, he stood up, adjusting the straps of his pack. "Let's see what's waiting for us." As they entered the woods, the air grew cooler, and the trees seemed to close in around them. The ground was soft underfoot, a carpet of leaves and moss that muffled their steps. Nolan could hear the occasional rustle of branches and the distant chirping of birds, but other than that, the forest felt unervingly quiet. They walked deeper into the woods, following the old trail that ran along the edge of the river. Nolan had heard stories about these woods, how people had gotten lost in them, how strange things had happened here. But he had always dismissed it as just local folklore, something to pass the time on slow afternoons. Now, Though, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth in those stories. Max was moving ahead of him now, his nose close to the ground, his ears flicking with every sound. He suddenly stopped, his body stiffening as he turned toward a small, overgrown path that led deeper into the forest. Nolan paused, feeling the shift in the air. Something was different. Max had never reacted like this before. "What is it, boy?" Nolan muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He followed Max down the path, each step feeling heavier than the last. The trees grew denser, and the shadows deepened. As they entered a small clearing, in the center of the clearing stood a single, massive tree, its trunk thick and gnarled, its branches twisting and reaching toward the sky. It looked ancient, older than anything Nolan had ever seen. As he approached the tree, he noticed something strange at its base. A large, flat stone, half buried in the ground. Nolan crouched down to inspect it, brushing away the dirt and leaves that had gathered on its surface. The stone was smooth, almost too smooth, with strange markings etched into it. Symbols that seemed to shift and change as he stared at them. A cold shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't just a tree. This was a marker, a sign of something hidden beneath. As Nolan reached out to touch the stone, Max growled softly, pulling at the leash. Nolan hesitated, but then, with a deep breath, he placed his hand on the stone. The moment his fingers made contact, the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The stone moved, slowly at first, then with a sudden jolt. Nolan stumbled back, his heart racing as the stone slid away, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into the earth. A chill swept over him as he stared into the dark abyss below. This was it. The secret. The mystery he had come for. And now, there was no turning back. As Nolan stood at the edge of the stone stairway, the cool, damp air from below seemed to beckon him, urging him to step down into the unknown. Max, ever watchful, stood by his side, his ears back and his body tense. It was as though the dog knew what lay ahead, his instincts alert to something Nolan couldn't quite grasp yet. With a deep breath, Nolan descended the steps, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his chest. Each step seemed to echo in the stillness of the forest, the air growing colder and the earth beneath him growing softer. The stone walls of the staircase were damp to the touch, the faint smell of moss and earth filling his nostrils. The darkness around him seemed to thicken as he moved further down, the light from the surface barely able to reach this deep into the earth. The steps led him into a small underground chamber. The first thing he noticed was the silence. It was complete, unnatural even, like the very air held its breath. The only sound was the faint shuffle of Max's paws behind him, the dog's low growl echoing off the stone walls as he followed. The room was small, but clearly crafted with purpose. The walls were lined with shelves made from old wood, their surfaces coated in a thick layer of dust. At the center of the room stood an old stone pedestal, on top of which was a large, weathered book. The book was ancient, its leather cover cracked and faded with age. It was as if it had been waiting here, hidden in the earth, for someone to find it. As Nolan stepped closer to the pedestal, he felt an unsettling chill crawl down his spine. This was no ordinary discovery. It felt like something far older, something far more significant. Max stood by the entrance to the chamber, his eyes fixed on the book, his low growl intensifying. Nolan reached out and slowly picked up the book, the cover strangely warm despite the cold of the underground room. He opened it, his fingers brushing over the ancient pages, which seemed to shimmer slightly under his touch. The words inside were written in an old script, one that Nolan could barely make out. But it was clear enough to see that the book was filled with information about the land, the orchard, and the mysteries buried deep within birchwood. As he flipped through the pages, Nolan found references to a hidden legacy, an inheritance that had been passed down through generations. The orchard, the trees, the stone markers in the woods, all of it had been part of a larger plan. It was as though the land itself was meant to be a sanctuary, a place that had been protected for centuries. But there was more. Something darker lurking beneath the surface. The journal spoke of a secret buried deep in the ground, something that could change everything if it were ever unearthed. Nolan's heart raced as he read the final entry. It was a warning. The secret lies beneath the heart of the orchard, it said. Those who seek it must be prepared to face the consequences. The land will protect its secrets, but it will not give them freely. Nolan closed the book with a snap, his mind reeling with the implications of what he had just read. The secret, the warning, it was all connected, and now, it was his responsibility to uncover the truth. He stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of it all. The orchard was not just a piece of land. It was something much more. It was a place of power, a place that had been carefully guarded for generations. And now, it was in his hands. Max stepped forward, sniffing the air, his body low to the ground, his tail stiff. Nolan turned to look at his dog, sensing that Max was picking up on something he hadn't yet realized. The dog's growl grew louder, his body vibrating with tension. Nolan's pulse quickened as he followed Max's gaze. Across the room, hidden in the shadows, was a small door he had missed earlier. It was made of the same weathered wood as the shelves, and it seemed to blend into the wall, as though it had been there for centuries, unnoticed by anyone who had come before. Without a word, Nolan moved toward the door, Max close behind him. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a narrow hallway that stretched into the darkness. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old stone. As he stepped inside, the temperature dropped even further, the chill seeping into his bones. The hallway led to another room, this one even more secretive than the last. It was filled with old artifacts, relics of a time long past, ancient tools, strange sculptures, and symbols carved into the walls. At the center of the room was a large, stone chest, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Nolan approached the chest with caution, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had come here for answers, but now, he was beginning to realize that the answers he sought might come at a cost. As he reached out to touch the chest, Max growled again, his body tensing, his eyes locked on something behind Nolan. A shadow moved across the far wall, and Nolan spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he always carried. But there was nothing there, only darkness. Nolan's breath quickened. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his gut. The land, the orchard, the secrets, it was all connected, and now it was watching him. He had entered a place that was not meant for him, a place that had been hidden for centuries. And now, it was beginning to reveal its true power. The chest, the shadow, the warning. It was all coming together, and Nolan could only hope that he was ready for what came next. As Nolan stood in the dimly lit chamber, the air thick with tension, his fingers brushed against the cold stone chest. Max, ever alert, was at his side, his ears pricked and his body stiff with unease. Something was changing, and Nolan could feel it deep in his bones. He had uncovered the first layer of the mystery that had been buried for centuries, but the more he delved into it, the more he realized there was something much darker hidden beneath. The journal, the symbols, the stone pedestal, and now this chest. All of it was tied together by forces beyond his understanding. The chest, its surface intricately carved with symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light, was a key to something much larger. Nolan had no idea what lay inside, but he knew he had to open it. His heart was pounding as he reached for the heavy lid, his breath shallow. Max gave a low growl, sensing the danger even before Nolan did. The chest creaked as Nolan slowly lifted the lid, revealing the contents inside. What he saw made his heart race even faster. Inside the chest, nestled in a bed of velvet cloth, was a small, wooden box, its surface worn with age but still intact. The box was sealed shut with an old brass lock, its key missing. Nolan hesitated, wondering what he should do next. He had found the box, but it was clear that it wasn't the end of the mystery. It was only the beginning. He needed to find the key. But where could it be? As he stood there, lost in thought, Max suddenly barked sharply, breaking his concentration. The dog's eyes were fixed on something across the room, his body tense. Nolan turned to follow Max's gaze, and his blood ran cold. In the far corner of the room, hidden in the shadows, stood a figure. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark robes that blended seamlessly with the darkness around it. Its face was hidden, but Nolan could feel its eyes on him, piercing. Through the shadows, the air around the figure seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, and Nolan instinctively stepped back, his hand reaching for the knife at his side. Max growled low, his hackles raised, but the figure did not move. It stood there, watching, waiting. Nolan's heart was racing, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the fear that threatened to rise within him. The figure did not answer. Instead, it raised a hand, pointing to the chest. Nolan followed the gesture, his eyes returning to the box inside. The figure's fingers curled slightly, as though urging him to open it. A chill ran down Nolan's spine. What was in the box? Why was this figure here? And most importantly, why was it not answering? Nolan didn't have the luxury of waiting for an answer. He had come this far, and he couldn't turn back now. Stepping forward, he approached the chest again, his mind racing. He needed to know what was inside that box, and he needed to find the key. But before he could act, the figure spoke. Its voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried an authority that made Nolan freeze in place. "You must not open it," the figure said, its voice echoing through the chamber. Nolan's heart skipped a beat. "Why?" he asked, unable to hide the fear in his voice. The figure stepped closer, its presence growing stronger, filling the room with an oppressive force. "Because what lies inside is not meant for you," it said. "It was never meant to be found." Nolan shook his head, the words not making sense. "It's my responsibility now," he said, more to himself than to the figure. "I've come this far, and I need to know what's inside." The figure's voice grew more insistent. "You cannot change what has already been set in motion," it said. "The orchard is a place of great power, and those who seek its secrets will pay the price." Nolan's mind raced as the figure's words echoed in his head. What did it mean? What price would he have to pay? And why had he been chosen to uncover the truth? The figure raised its hand again, as if to stop him, but Nolan was already reaching for the box. He didn't care about the warning. He had to. No. As his fingers brushed the surface of the box, a sudden rush of energy surged through him, knocking him back. The force of it sent him stumbling to the floor, his vision blurry for a moment. Max barked loudly, his body tense, but Nolan could hardly hear him. His entire focus was on the box, which now seemed to glow faintly in the dark. He had touched it, and now there was no turning back. He stood up slowly, his legs weak from the force of the blast, but he was determined. The figure was gone, vanished into the shadows, leaving Nolan alone with the chest. Max stood beside him, his fur bristling, as if he too understood the gravity of the situation. Nolan looked down at the wooden box once more, his heart pounding in his chest. The key was still missing, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever secret lay inside, it was meant to be uncovered, and he was the one who would uncover it. With that thought in mind, Nolan turned back toward the chamber, determined to find the answers he had come for, no matter what the cost. As Nolan stood there, his fingers still tingling from the strange force that had thrown him back, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The box, now glowing faintly in the dim light, seemed almost alive in its own way, as if it was calling to him. Max stood by his side, his eyes fixed on the object, his body still tense, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Nolan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. He couldn't stop now. He needed answers. Whatever force had thrown him back, it was clear that it was meant to stop him from discovering the truth. But why? What was so important about this box? And what secret did the orchard hold that had kept it hidden for so long? Nolan's mind raced with questions, but he pushed them aside. He had to focus on what was in front of him. The box. The secret. The legacy. With a determined step, he reached for the box once more. This time, he wasn't afraid. He was ready. As his fingers touched the smooth surface, he felt a jolt of energy, not as strong as before, but powerful nonetheless. The lid of the box creaked open, revealing its contents. Inside, nestled among pieces of old parchment and yellowed maps, was a small key. It was made of brass, its shape simple yet elegant, and it seemed to shine with an inner light. Nolan's breath caught in his throat. The key to the mystery he had been chasing. Without thinking, he picked it up and held it in his hand. As soon as he did, the room seemed to shift. The walls around him, once solid and unmoving, began to vibrate, faintly at first, then with increasing intensity. Nolan's heart raced as he realized that the key was more than just a physical object. It was the key to unlocking something much greater. The vibrations grew stronger, and the air around him grew colder. Max growled louder, his body bristling with unease. Nolan didn't know what to expect. but he knew that the key was about to lead him to the next step of the journey. He needed to find where it fit. The glow from the key grew brighter, casting strange, flickering shadows against the stone walls. Nolan's eyes scanned the room, searching for something, anything, that would make sense of what was happening. Then, his gaze landed on the stone pedestal, the one where he had first discovered the journal. The symbols etched into the stone were faint, but still visible. He could see now that they were not random. They formed a pattern, a map, guiding him to the next step. Nolan's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped toward the pedestal, the key still clutched in his hand. He placed it into the center of the pedestal's indentation, his fingers trembling slightly as he turned it. There was a deep, resonant click, followed by a low rumble that seemed to shake the very foundation of the room. The stone beneath his feet shifted, and a section of the wall slowly began to move, revealing a hidden passage. Nolan stood frozen, unsure of what he was about to face. But he knew one thing. He had come too far to stop now. The passage before him was narrow and dark, the air thick with dust and the smell of old earth. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him as he stepped forward, Max right behind him. The walls of the passage were lined with more symbols, more carvings that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. It was clear now that this place was not just a hidden chamber. It was part of something far larger, something connected to the very fabric of the land itself. As Nolan moved deeper into the passage, he felt the energy around him intensify, almost as if the earth was alive, watching him, guiding him toward something. His footsteps echoed in the narrow corridor, the sound amplified by the silence that enveloped him. The air grew colder, and the faint glow from the walls seemed to flicker with each step he took. Finally, the passage opened into a larger room, a vast underground cavern. The floor was uneven, and stalactites hung from the ceiling like ancient teeth. In the center of the cavern was a massive stone structure, its surface covered in symbols, much like the pedestal. The structure was shaped like a large, intricate doorway, its edges carved with the same symbols Nolan had seen throughout the underground chamber. As he stepped closer, he felt the energy in the room surge, a powerful force pulling him toward the doorway. Max barked once, the sound sharp and echoing in the cavern, but Nolan was too focused to pay attention. He was drawn to the structure, his hand reaching out toward it. The key was still in his grip, its warmth pulsing as if it was urging him on. As he placed the key into a slot at the center of the doorway, the entire cavern seemed to come alive. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and the stone doorway slowly began to open, revealing a bright, blinding light beyond. Nolan squinted, shielding his eyes from the light, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The doorway opened fully, and the light seemed to pour out, bathing the cavern in a warm, golden glow. Nolan took a deep breath, steadying himself for whatever lay beyond. He could feel the weight of history, of centuries of secrets, pressing down on him. But he was ready. With one last look at Max, who stood by his side, his body tense but trusting, Nolan stepped forward into the light. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt that he was on the right path, walking towards something that would change his life forever. As Nolan stepped into the blinding light, he felt the weight of everything that had led him here. The storm, the journal, the stone pedestal, the mysterious key, and the shadowy figure that had warned him. It all felt like it was converging in this very moment, as though the universe itself had chosen him for this path. His pulse raced as he moved deeper into the light, Max by his side, his fur bristling with the same unease Nolan felt deep in his chest. The moment he crossed the threshold of the doorway, the light softened, revealing a vast, expansive chamber. The air was warm and thick with a sense of ancient power. The walls were lined with glowing runes, their symbols pulsating faintly as if alive. The room seemed to stretch on forever, and at the center stood a massive stone structure, unlike anything Nolan had ever seen. It was a towering column, carved with intricate patterns and covered in moss and vines that seemed to shift when he looked at them. The column exuded an energy that Nolan could feel deep in his bones, a force both familiar and foreign. He had the distinct feeling that he wasn't just in a physical space anymore. He was in a place that existed outside of time, a place where history and destiny were written in the very stones beneath his feet. Max's low growl broke the silence, and Nolan looked down at his dog. Max's eyes were fixed on the stone column, his stance rigid. Nolan knew something was wrong, but he didn't know what. It was as if the air itself was charged with anticipation, a pressure building in the room that made it hard to breathe. Slowly, cautiously, Nolan made his way to the column, drawn to it as if by some invisible force. His fingers brushed against the surface, and the moment he made contact, a pulse of energy shot through him. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he felt as if he were falling through time, seeing flashes of the past, the present, and the future all at once. He saw images of the orchard, its trees standing tall and ancient, their roots winding deep into the earth, entwined with secrets that had been buried for centuries. He saw faces, those who had come before him, people who had tried and failed to unlock the mystery of this place. And then, he saw a vision of himself, standing here, at the heart of the orchard, holding the key to something powerful, something dangerous. As quickly as it came, the vision faded, and Nolan was back in the chamber, his hand still resting on the stone column. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. What had he seen? What did it mean? He had always known there was something powerful about the orchard, something beyond the land itself, but now he understood it in a way he never had before. This place, this chamber, was the heart of the orchard. It was where the land's power originated, where the secrets of the past were locked away, waiting for the right person to unlock them. And now, that person was him. Max's growl intensified, and Nolan turned to look at his dog. Max was staring intently at something in the distance, his tail raised in alert. Nolan followed his gaze, his breath catching in his throat. Across the chamber, at the far end, a door had appeared, an ancient, wooden door, adorned with the same glowing symbols as the walls. It hadn't been there a moment ago, and yet, now it stood before him, beckoning him forward. A feeling of unease washed over Nolan as he moved toward the door, but his curiosity pushed him forward. The closer he got, the more the air seemed to hum, vibrating with energy. When he reached the door, he placed his hand on the handle, feeling the cold wood beneath his fingers. He hesitated for only a moment before turning the handle. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow passageway beyond. The passage was dim, the only light coming from faint cracks in the walls, as if the very stone was alive and breathing. Nolan felt a surge of both fear and excitement. He had come so far, but he had no idea what lay ahead. As he stepped into the passage, Max at his heels, the door slammed shut behind him with a resounding thud. The sudden darkness was oppressive, but Nolan pushed forward, his instincts guiding him. The passage narrowed as he walked, the walls closing in on either side. The air grew cooler, the smell of earth and moss filling his nose. He could hear nothing but the sound of his own footsteps and Max's low panting. And then, as he rounded a corner, he saw it. A faint light ahead, glowing with an eerie, otherworldly brightness. It was coming from a small alcove in the wall, and as Nolan approached, he realized what it was. At the center of the alcove was a stone pedestal, much like the one he had seen earlier, and resting atop it was a small, glass vial. The vial shimmered with a liquid that seemed to glow from within, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Nolan reached out, his fingers trembling as he took the vial in his hand. As soon as he touched it, the room seemed to shift again, and he was flooded with another vision. This time, he saw the orchard in full bloom, its trees bearing fruit unlike any Nolan had ever seen. Shimmering, golden apples that glowed with a light that seemed to pulse with life. The vision shifted, and Nolan saw himself holding one of the apples, its glow growing brighter until it engulfed him. He could feel the power of the orchard coursing through him, filling him with a sense of strength and clarity. But then, the vision turned dark. The apples began to rot, their glow fading to a sickly, dull color. The trees began to wither, and the ground beneath them cracked and split open, swallowing everything in its path. Nolan was falling into the darkness, but he couldn't escape. He gasped as the vision ended, his hand still clutching the vial. He was shaken, his heart pounding in his chest. The orchard, the key, the vial. It was all connected, and Nolan knew that whatever path he chose next would determine the fate of everything. But he didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know how to stop the darkness that threatened to consume the orchard and the power that lay within it. As Nolan stood there, his fingers still gripping the glowing vial, the weight of what he had just seen pressed heavily upon him. The vision of the orchard, its trees bearing the golden apples, the light that had engulfed him, and the darkness that had followed, was still vivid in his mind. He had come here seeking answers, but now the more he uncovered, the more uncertain everything seemed. What was the true purpose of the orchard? And why had it been hidden away for so long? Max, sensing Nolan's distress, stood at his side, his body tense, his eyes scanning the darkness around them. The air in the passageway was still, thick with the scent of damp earth and moss, and yet Nolan felt as though something was moving just beyond his reach, just outside his line of sight. The vial in his hand seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, its glow faint but steady. The answers were within his grasp, but how much of the truth was he willing to uncover? He couldn't ignore what he had seen, the orchard, the apples, the power it held, but he wasn't sure he was ready to face the consequences of unleashing it. The vial seemed to burn through his palm, urging him forward. Taking a deep breath, Nolan steadied himself. He needed to understand. There was something important about this place, something more than just the orchard. The land itself held the key to a mystery that had been buried for centuries. Max gave a soft whine, as though urging Nolan to keep moving. With a final glance at the vial, Nolan placed it back into his bag, the weight of it still lingering in his chest. He couldn't let it control him. Not yet. He needed to explore further, find the truth behind what lay hidden in the orchard. He moved toward the far end of the passage, his boots silent against the stone floor. The glow from the vial dimmed as he left it behind, but the sense of urgency only grew. The symbols on the walls seemed to flicker as he passed, their meaning still just out of reach. At the end of the passage, Nolan found another door, this one more ornate than the last. Carved into the wood were more of the same symbols, but this time they were arranged in a pattern, as though telling a story. He placed his hand on the door, feeling a sudden surge of energy, as though the door itself was alive, waiting for him to open it. He hesitated, glancing back at Max. The dog's gaze was fixed on the door, his body poised as if ready to move at any moment. Nolan took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Beyond it was a large, circular chamber, its high ceiling supported by stone columns, covered in ivy and moss. In the center of the room was a stone pedestal, much like the ones Nolan had encountered before, but this one was different. It was empty, save for a small, rectangular box sitting atop it. Nolan approached the pedestal, his heart pounding as he wondered what he would find next. The box seemed familiar, and yet, it was unlike anything he had seen before. Its surface was smooth, polished, and black as coal, with no markings or symbols to indicate its purpose. Max's growl broke the silence, and Nolan turned to look at his dog. The growl was low, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make Nolan pause. Max was staring at the box, his eyes narrowed, his body tense. Nolan had learned to trust his dog's instincts, and he could tell that something was wrong. The air in the room grew thick with tension, and Nolan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He stepped forward cautiously, his fingers brushing against the box. The moment he touched it, a jolt of electricity surged through him, and he staggered back, his body convulsing with the force of it. The vision came again, this time more intense, more vivid. He saw the orchard again, but this time it was different. The trees were no longer lush and green. They were twisted and gnarled, their bark cracked and withered. The apples that once glowed with golden light had turned black, rotting on the branches. The land around him seemed to be dying, the earth cracking and shifting, as though the very foundation of the orchard was crumbling beneath him. Nolan gasped, his chest tightening as the vision faded. He stumbled back, his mind reeling from the images that had flooded his consciousness. This was what the orchard had become, what it would become if he didn't stop it. The land was dying, and it was up to him to fix it. But how? He could feel the weight of the box in his hands, the weight of the power it contained. It was more than just a relic. It was the key to saving the orchard, or perhaps, to destroying it completely. Max stood by his side, his growl now a low rumble, his eyes locked on the pedestal. It was clear that the dog sensed the danger too. Nolan stood still, his mind racing. He knew that opening the box was a risk, but it was a risk he had to take. He had come too far, and the truth was just beyond his reach. With a deep breath, Nolan opened the box, and the world seemed to shift around him. The air grew thick, the walls of the chamber vibrating with a low hum. Inside the box was a small, silver key, its surface glinting in the dim light. The moment he touched it, the chamber shook, and the ground beneath him seemed to crack open. The key pulsed in his hand, its power overwhelming him. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. He had found the key to the orchard's heart, but now the real challenge would begin. The land was calling to him, urging him to unlock its secrets, but Nolan knew that whatever lay ahead, he would face it with Max by his side. Together, they would either save the orchard or watch it fall into ruin. As Nolan stood there, holding the silver key in his hand, the chamber seemed to come alive around him. The low hum of energy intensified, vibrating through the very air, filling every inch of the room with a palpable force. It was as though the key itself was beckoning him, urging him to use it, to unlock the final secrets of the orchard that had been hidden away for so long. Max, his loyal companion, stood by his side, his eyes fixed on the key, his body tense as if he, too, could sense the immense power that it held. Nolan's heart raced. He had come so far, uncovered so many layers of the mystery, but now, standing at the threshold of the orchard's secrets, he realized he had no idea what would happen once he used the key. Would it save the orchard, or would it unleash something far worse? The weight of the decision pressed heavily on him, but there was no turning back now. He had the key, and with it, the answers he sought. With a deep breath, Nolan stepped forward, his eyes locked on the stone pedestal in the center of the room. The pedestal seemed to pulse with life, its surface now glowing brighter, as though it recognized the key and the significance of the moment. As he approached, the air around him grew thicker, heavier, the tension building with each step. He could feel the pulse of the orchard calling to him, the land itself yearning for release. Reaching the pedestal, Nolan placed the silver key into the lock at its center. As he turned the key, the room seemed to hold its breath. There was a moment of complete silence, and then, without warning, the pedestal shuddered violently, and the floor beneath Nolan's feet cracked open with a deafening roar. The sound echoed through the chamber, reverberating in his chest. Nolan stumbled back, but Max stood firm, growling low, his fur bristling. The ground continued to shake, and the stone walls trembled as if the entire cavern was coming alive. Nolan gripped the pedestal for support, his heart pounding in his chest. The chamber filled with a blinding light, far brighter than anything he had seen before. It seemed to pierce through the very stone, flooding the room with warmth and energy. Nolan shielded his eyes with his arm, but he could feel the heat, the power, radiating from the center of the room. As the light grew, the shaking intensified, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light disappeared, and the room fell silent. Nolan stood in the center of the cavern, his body still trembling from the force of the explosion. Slowly, he lowered his arm, and as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw what had changed. The pedestal was no longer there. In its place stood a massive stone door, its surface covered in intricate carvings, glowing with the same faint light as the walls. The door seemed ancient, its edges weathered by time, yet it radiated an energy that was unmistakably alive. Nolan's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the final threshold, the last barrier to the secrets of the orchard. He approached the door, his mind racing with questions. What lay beyond? Was it the truth he had been seeking, or something darker? Max stood beside him, his body tense, his growl soft but constant. The dog, too, seemed to sense the significance of the moment. Nolan placed his hand on the door, feeling the pulse of energy beneath the surface. He could hear the faint hum, like the heartbeat of the land itself. The door responded to his touch, the carvings shifting and rearranging, revealing a symbol that Nolan recognized from the journal. It was the same symbol that had appeared in his vision, the one that had marked the beginning of this entire journey. Without thinking, he pressed his palm against the symbol, and the door creaked open, revealing a dark passage beyond. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of earth and decay filled his nostrils. Nolan hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Max. The dog's eyes were fixed on the passage, his body still tense, but Nolan could see the trust in his gaze. Max was ready. With a deep breath, Nolan stepped forward, his hand still resting on the door. As he crossed the threshold, the light from the chamber behind him seemed to fade, and the passage grew darker. The air grew colder, the scent of earth stronger. He moved slowly, feeling his way along the walls, the vibrations from the chamber still humming beneath his feet. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning as though it were designed to disorient him. Yet Nolan pressed forward, his instincts guiding him. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to stop now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a larger chamber. The walls were covered in moss and ivy, the ceiling high and vaulted. At the center of the room was a stone altar, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols. The air in the room was thick with a strange energy, and Nolan could feel it pulling him toward the altar. Max growled softly, his body bristling with unease. Nolan approached the altar, his heart racing. This was it. This was where the orchard's secrets would be revealed. But as he stepped closer, the symbols on the altar began to glow brighter, and the ground beneath him trembled once again. The altar cracked open with a loud rumble, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside, nestled in a bed of velvet cloth, was another key, this one larger, made of dark metal and adorned with intricate engravings. Nolan reached for it, his fingers trembling. This was the final key, the one that would unlock the true power of the orchard. He knew that with this key, he would finally learn the truth of the land's legacy. But as his fingers closed around it, the chamber shook again, and Nolan's heart stopped. The air grew thick with a strange, oppressive force, and for the first time, he felt truly afraid. What was this place? What had he just unlocked? As Nolan held the dark metal key, its intricate engravings burning against his skin, the room trembled once again. The symbols on the altar glowed brighter, their light now pulsing in sync with the beat of his heart. Max, ever alert, growled low, his fur bristling as the air grew thicker with a sense of foreboding. The vibrations beneath Nolan's feet grew stronger, and he could feel the very earth shifting around him. The sense of power that had surrounded him all along now seemed overwhelming, as if the land itself was waking up. Something was changing, something far beyond his understanding. The key, in his hand, felt heavier now, as though the very weight of the orchard's secrets had transferred to it. Nolan's mind raced. He had uncovered so much, but now he was faced with the final, most dangerous piece of the puzzle. What was waiting for him? What had he just unlocked? A sharp, guttural noise broke through the growing hum in the room. It wasn't Max this time, but something else, something deep beneath the ground. The sound was like the earth groaning, shifting, and Nolan realized with a chill that he wasn't just in a room anymore. He was standing in the heart of the orchard, the very core of what had been hidden for centuries. The vibrations intensified, and the altar cracked open wider, revealing a hidden passage. Dark, thick shadows spilled from the crack, swirling like smoke. Nolan's heart pounded as the passage beckoned him, its blackness inviting yet filled with an eerie sense of danger. Max stood by his side, his body tense, his growl now a deep, rumbling warning. Nolan knew he had no choice but to go forward. This was the moment he had been preparing for, though he wasn't sure what lay ahead. Taking a deep breath, he stepped toward the passage, his hand still clutching the key. The darkness seemed to envelop him as he passed through, but his steps remained steady. Max moved ahead, his senses sharp, guiding the way. As they moved deeper into the passage, the glow of the symbols behind them faded, replaced by an impenetrable darkness. The air grew cold and damp, and the ground beneath Nolan's boots felt soft, almost as though it were alive, shifting under his weight. He could hear his breath quickening, his heart beating in time with the rhythm of the land. The passage seemed endless, winding down into the very earth itself, and Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something far greater than he had ever imagined. Eventually, the path opened into a vast underground chamber. The ceiling was so high that it was lost in darkness, and the walls stretched out on either side, covered in ancient carvings. In the center of the room stood another stone pedestal, this one larger than the ones he had seen before, and at its base, a massive stone door loomed, covered in the same glowing symbols. Nolan's breath caught as he approached the pedestal. He had found it. The heart of the orchard, the final place where the secrets had been hidden. The pedestal was raised, surrounded by a deep, black chasm, and it seemed to pulse with the same energy he had felt before, as though it were alive. Max's growl deepened, his eyes locked on the stone door. Nolan stepped closer, his hand outstretched, and as he did, the door seemed to respond. The symbols on it began to glow brighter, the lines shifting and rearranging. The stone door groaned, and the heavy sound echoed through the chamber like a warning. Nolan hesitated, looking at Max. The dog's body was rigid with tension, but he said nothing. It was as if Max, too, knew that the answers they had been seeking were within this door, but so too were the dangers they had been warned about. Nolan's fingers brushed against the surface of the door, and the energy surged again, stronger than before, threatening to overwhelm him. He felt the key in his pocket, burning against his chest, as though urging him forward. The symbols on the door seemed to form a pattern, a shape that Nolan recognized. A spiral, like the roots of the orchard, twisting deep into the earth. He took the key from his pocket, his hand shaking slightly, and placed it into the door's lock. The moment he turned it, the room seemed to hold its breath. The ground shook beneath him again, but this time it felt different. The vibrations were not just physical, they were deeper, more resonant, as though the land itself was crying out. The door groaned louder, its surface cracking as if it were being torn apart. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the door slammed open. A blinding light poured through the opening, so bright that Nolan had to shield his eyes. The light was warm, full of life, and as he stepped through, the sensation of weightlessness overtook him. For a moment, he couldn't tell if he was standing or floating. The light seemed to wrap around him, pulling him into its embrace. Max whined beside him, but Nolan couldn't hear him, couldn't focus on anything but the overwhelming power that flooded through him. The space he entered was unlike anything he had seen before. It was a vast, open expanse, with a sky overhead that seemed to shimmer with an impossible light. The trees of the orchard stretched for miles, their branches heavy with glowing fruit. It was beautiful, too beautiful to be real. But as Nolan stood there, awestruck, the vision began to twist. The glowing fruit turned dark, their light dimming. The trees began to wither, their roots cracking and splintering, as if the very heart of the orchard was dying. The land groaned again, and Nolan could feel it in his bones. He had unlocked the heart of the orchard, but what he had unleashed was not just its power, it was its curse. He was standing at the edge of something that could destroy everything he had come to protect. He had to act quickly, or everything he had fought for, would be lost. As Nolan stood in the vast, open expanse, the beauty of the orchard surrounding him quickly turned to something much darker. The once glowing fruit now hung from the trees like rotting remnants, their once brilliant light dimming to a dull, sickly hue. The trees themselves seemed to shudder, their once strong trunks cracking and splintering as if the life force had been drained from them. Nolan felt a sinking weight in his chest as the realization hit him. He had unleashed something far more powerful than he had ever imagined. The land, the orchard, it was dying. He could feel it in the air, thick and oppressive, as if the very earth itself was gasping for breath. Max, who had been standing beside him, now whimpered softly, his body tense as he looked around, sensing the change in the atmosphere. The ground beneath Nolan's feet began to crack, small fissures appearing, as if the very foundations of the orchard were breaking apart. Nolan's heart raced as he realized that the key he had used to open the door had not only unlocked the heart of the orchard, but had also set something dark and dangerous into motion. The light from the fruit faded completely, and the trees began to wither faster. Leaves fell from their branches, turning to dust before they even touched the ground. Nolan could feel the weight of the curse he had triggered pressing down on him. He had come here to protect the orchard, to uncover its secrets, but now he wondered if it was already too late to save it. As the orchard around him began to crumble, Nolan's thoughts raced. What had he done? He had unlocked the power of the orchard, but in doing so, he had unleashed its destructive force. He looked down at the silver key still clutched in his hand, feeling its warmth. This key had been the catalyst, but now it seemed like a symbol of his failure. He could hear the rumbling of the earth beneath him, the ground shaking more violently, as the very heart of the orchard seemed to beat in time with his own frantic pulse. There was no time to waste. He had to act. Turning to Max, Nolan gripped the dog's collar tightly. "We need to find a way to reverse this," he said, his voice hoarse with urgency. Max barked once, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Nolan took a deep breath, scanning the withering orchard. It was clear now that the land had been connected to something far greater than just its beauty. It held a power that could heal or destroy, and he had been the one to set it free. But there had to be a way to stop it. He couldn't let everything fall apart. The destruction around him seemed endless. The once majestic trees now lay in ruins, their bark blackened and crumbling to dust. Nolan's gaze turned toward the stone pedestal he had seen earlier, the one at the center of the chamber. He could see that it had begun to glow once more, faintly at first, but the light was growing stronger, pulsing in time with the rumbling of the earth. He knew that the pedestal had been the source of the orchard's power, its heart. If he could somehow reach it, perhaps he could find a way to reverse the damage. He turned to Max. "Stay close, boy," he muttered. Together, they ran toward the pedestal, the ground shifting beneath their feet with every step. As they neared the pedestal, the air grew even heavier, thick with the energy of the orchard's power. Nolan could feel it in his chest, a pressure that was almost unbearable. The light from the pedestal now enveloped him, blinding in its intensity, but Nolan pushed forward, his hand outstretched toward the stone. When his fingers made contact, a surge of energy coursed through him, a shock so intense that it nearly knocked him to his knees. The pedestal seemed to respond to his touch, the symbols etched into its surface glowing brighter, the energy crackling in the air. Nolan gasped as the vision came again. This time, he saw the orchard in its full glory, its trees standing tall and strong, the golden fruit glowing brightly. But beneath that beauty, he saw the darkness, a force that had been buried for so long, waiting to be unleashed. The land had always been connected to both light and shadow, and now that balance had been disrupted. Nolan's breath quickened as he realized the truth. The orchard was not just a place of power, it was a guardian of the land, a protector of the natural balance. When that balance was disturbed, the land fought back, as it had done now. The only way to save the orchard, to restore the balance, was to give something in return. He had taken the orchard's power by unlocking its secrets, and now he had to restore that power by offering something back. Nolan's mind raced. What could he give to restore the balance? What was the cost of undoing the destruction he had caused? He knew what he had to do. The key in his hand was not just a tool to unlock the power of the orchard. It was also a symbol of the price he had to pay. He had to sacrifice something of his own to restore the balance. His heart ached at the thought, but he knew there was no other way. With trembling hands, Nolan placed the key back onto the pedestal, the energy crackling in the air as the pedestal absorbed the key. Max barked, sensing the change, his fur standing on end. The light from the pedestal grew brighter still, enveloping Nolan in its warmth. Slowly, the rumbling of the earth began to subside, the ground beneath them growing still. The orchard, too, began to heal. The tree's bark regained its strength, the leaves began to sprout, and the golden fruit slowly began to glow once more. But Nolan knew that the price had been paid. The orchard was alive again, but he had given up a part of himself in the process. As the land around him healed, Nolan could feel the change within him. The burden of the orchard's power had taken its toll, but it had saved the land. Max stood by his side, his tail wagging, sensing that the danger had passed. They had done it. They had saved the orchard. But Nolan knew that the cost had been high. The balance had been restored, but at what price? The journey had changed him in ways he hadn't yet fully understood. And though the orchard had been saved, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that the true consequences of his actions were still unfolding, hidden beneath the roots of the land he had fought so hard to protect. As the orchard began to heal, the air around Nolan seemed to grow lighter, the oppressive weight lifting slowly. The trees that had once been withered and dying now stood tall, their leaves shimmering with new life. The golden fruit began to glow once more, casting a soft light that bathed the land in warmth. Nolan's heart still pounded in his chest, the exhaustion from the battle he had just fought evident in every breath he took. But there was something else now, a sense of peace, of completion. The land was alive again. Max, his loyal dog, trotted happily beside him, his tail wagging as he sniffed the air, sensing the changes around them. It was as if Max understood that the danger had passed, that the orchard was no longer on the brink of destruction. But even with the orchard restored, Nolan knew that something had changed within him. He had made a sacrifice, a part of himself that he couldn't fully understand yet. The key, the pedestal, the vial, all of it had come at a price. As the orchard continued to heal, Nolan realized that he had given up more than just his time. An effort. He had given up a piece of his soul. He wasn't sure how he knew, but he felt it deep inside. The energy of the land had transferred to him, and now he carried it with him, woven into the fabric of his being. It was both a gift and a curse, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As Nolan walked through the orchard, taking in the revitalized landscape, he saw the faces of those who had come before him, the people who had once tended to this land, who had protected it with their lives. Their spirits seemed to linger, watching over the orchard, ensuring that it would not fall into ruin again. The orchard was not just a place of power, it was a living entity, a guardian of the land and its secrets. And now, Nolan had become a part of that legacy. But the true cost of this legacy was something Nolan had yet to fully understand. As he stood among the trees, a sense of unease slowly crept over him. He had saved the orchard, but at what price? What would become of him now? Would he be forever bound to this land, its power coursing through his veins? The question lingered in his mind, unanswered, as he continued to walk deeper into the orchard. There was still much to learn, much to understand. And although the orchard had been saved, Nolan knew that his journey was far from over. In the distance, Nolan spotted the stone pedestal again, its once glowing symbols now dim and faint. He approached it slowly, feeling the pull of the land guiding him. As he reached the pedestal, he felt the familiar surge of energy, but this time it was different. It wasn't the overwhelming rush he had felt before. Instead, it was a quiet, steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the orchard itself. Nolan placed his hand on the pedestal, and as he did, the symbols flickered, coming to life once more. A voice, soft and ancient, echoed in his mind. "You have done what was needed, but your journey is not yet complete." The words sent a chill down Nolan's spine. He had expected something, some final sign that the orchard was safe, that everything was as it should be. But this was different. The voice continued, its tone both comforting and foreboding. "The land is at peace, but there are other forces at play. You must seek the other pieces of the puzzle, the other guardians who protect this world. You will not be alone, but you must not falter. The balance is fragile." Nolan stood still, his mind racing. The other guardians? What did that mean? What puzzle was he meant to solve? He had thought the orchard's secrets were the end of his journey, but now he understood that it was only the beginning. "Go," the voice whispered, fading away as the symbols on the pedestal dimmed once more. "Your destiny awaits." As the voice faded, Nolan stood in silence, processing what he had just heard. The orchard had been saved, yes, but there was more to this world than he had ever realized. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and it was up to him to find them. He wasn't sure what this new journey would entail, or where it would lead, but he knew one thing. He couldn't do it alone. Max, his loyal companion, stood beside him, sensing the shift in the air. Nolan looked down at his dog and smiled, a sense of resolve settling within him. Whatever the future held, he would face it with Max by his side. They had already come this far together, and they would continue to walk the path ahead. With one last look at the orchard, now at peace, Nolan turned and began to walk toward the horizon. The journey was not over, and he knew that it was only just beginning. The horizon stretched before Nolan as he walked away from the orchard, its once gloomy trees now standing tall and vibrant under the soft glow of the setting sun. The gentle breeze seemed to carry with it a whisper of the land's gratitude, a silent thank you for the part he had played in restoring its balance. Max trotted happily beside him, his tail wagging in time with Nolan's steps. They had come so far together, and yet, Nolan knew that the path ahead was only just beginning. The weight of the journey that lay before him pressed lightly against his chest, but for the first time in a long while, it did not feel like a burden. It felt like a calling. The voice from the pedestal, the whispers of other guardians, Nolan had heard them. Clearly, even though the message was still fresh in his mind. There were more pieces to the puzzle, more forces to be faced. The orchard had been just the start, and the rest of the world, with all its mysteries and hidden powers, was waiting for him. He was not alone in this, he knew that now. Max, ever faithful, was his companion, and together, they would seek out the answers that were hidden beneath the earth, scattered across the land, and buried in forgotten corners of the world. The weight of his newfound purpose grounded him, but it also gave him a sense of direction, a sense of peace. No matter how far the journey took him, no matter how many unknowns lay ahead, he would face them with strength. He would not falter. As they walked, the land around them seemed to hum with life, as if the energy Nolan had unlocked in the orchard was spreading through the very fabric of nature. The grass beneath his feet felt alive, each blade swaying in unison, as though the earth itself was breathing. The trees he passed stood tall, their branches reaching for the sky, their leaves shimmering as if thanking him for what had been done. Nolan paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of it all. The orchards were no longer dying, their fruit once again glowing with a golden light. The world around him was healing, but he knew that healing came at a cost. And while the orchard had been saved, the land's power would require him to continue the work. In the distance, a small village lay nestled at the edge of the woods, the smoke from chimneys rising into the sky in thin spirals. It was a peaceful scene, but Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that it was a false peace. He had been part of something much larger than just the orchard, and he knew that his journey would lead him to places where the balance was far more fragile. As they neared the village, Nolan stopped once again, his gaze drifting over the landscape. He had come here for answers, for the truth about the orchard, but now he understood that the world had many layers of truth, many untold stories hidden just beneath the surface. The village was quiet, peaceful even, but Nolan's instincts told him that this was just another step in the path that would ultimately lead to something greater, something that could change the course of everything. He looked down at Max, who was sniffing the ground, his attention caught by something just beyond Nolan's view. The dog's eyes met Nolan's, and the brief exchange spoke volumes. They both felt it. This was not the end. This was just the beginning. Nolan stepped into the village, Max by his side, and as they walked deeper into the heart of it, the whispers of the land seemed to grow louder. The orchard had been saved, but there were still guardians to meet, truths to uncover, and forces to reckon with. Nolan's purpose had been awakened, and now, he would follow it wherever it led. The orchard was only the first chapter in a story that was far from over, and Nolan knew that he would see it through to the end. With Max at his side, they would face whatever came next, together. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with both danger and hope, but Nolan was no longer afraid. He had found his place in the world, and now, he would protect it, just as the orchard had once been protected. He had done what was necessary to restore balance, but the true test of his journey was yet to come. And so, with the sun setting behind him, casting a golden glow over the land, Nolan walked forward, his heart steady and his mind resolute. The adventure, the discovery, and the challenge were waiting. And Nolan, with Max by his side, was ready. In this thrilling tale of perseverance and destiny, a veteran embarks on a journey to uncover the hidden mysteries of an ancient orchard. Alongside his loyal dog, he discovers secrets that bind the land, power, and history together. As the orchard comes back to life after facing dark forces, the veteran realizes that his actions hold more weight than he ever imagined. This adventure delves deep into the heart of a veteran's courage, sacrifice, and the unexpected challenges that arise when a simple man is called upon to protect something far greater than himself. With each step, the veteran learns more about his purpose and the powerful legacy that connects him to the land, uncovering layers of forgotten history and unimaginable power. The story takes you on a gripping journey, full of surprises, danger, and the determination of a veteran to restore balance to the land he swore to protect. These veteran stories reveal the untold connections between individuals and their destinies, proving that even the most ordinary lives can lead to extraordinary adventures. Join this veteran and his faithful companion as they uncover secrets that will change their lives forever and experience the depth of heroism in veteran stories that go beyond the battlefield and into the heart of mystery and legend. The tale unfolds with twists that test the veteran's resolve, proving that true strength lies not just in physical battles, but in the ability to embrace the unknown and protect what matters most. As this veteran and his dog uncover the truth behind the orchard, their journey becomes a powerful reminder of the unyielding spirit of those who serve, and how every veteran story holds the potential to change the world in ways unimaginable.